Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something major. A huge diplomatic shift, actually. It's the full return of international sanctions against Iran.
That's right. We're talking about the snapback mechanism. You might also hear it called the trigger mechanism. It's all under UN Security Council Resolution 2231, and it basically just reversed all the sanctions relief Iran got from the 2015 nuclear deal.
And our mission today, well, it's to get past the headlines. We want to unpack what really happened, what specific sanctions are back, what was the immediate economic hit.
And maybe most interestingly, how did the regime react inside Iran? We've got details on their internal security lockdown based on the source material.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Right. So to understand the snapback, you have to go back to the beginning. The JCPOA, the nuclear deal from 2015.
The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action.
Exactly. And the basic idea was a trade-off, right? International sanctions from the UN, the US, the EU, they were lifted. But in return, Iran had to seriously limit its nuclear program.
And Resolution 2231 sort of locked that agreement into international law.
Pretty much. It codified the whole deal at the UN Security Council.
So who pulled the trigger on reversing this, and why now?
That was the P3 France, the UK, and Germany. They're the European countries who signed the original deal. And they activated the snapback because, well, Iran just wasn't holding up its end of the bargain.
What were the specific violations?
Oh, they were significant. The source material is clear on this. Iran ramped up its uranium enrichment way beyond the limits. They were caught doing secretive things at sites they hadn't declared. They restricted access for the IAEA inspectors.
The International Atomic Energy Agency.
Right. And eventually, they just shut off the surveillance cameras altogether. These weren't small slip-ups. They were major breaches of Resolution 2231.
Okay, but here's what always gets me. Russia and China, they have veto power at the UN Security Council. They obviously didn't want these sanctions back. How come they couldn't just veto it?
That's the, let's call it the clever part of the snapback mechanism. It was designed into Resolution 2231 from the start. It's almost like an automatic default.
What do you mean automatic?
Well, it wasn't like a normal resolution needing a new yes vote. Once the P3 formally notified the Council of Iran's non-compliance, the process started. To stop the sanctions from snapping back, someone like Russia or China would have had to propose a new resolution.
A resolution to keep the sanctions relief going.
Exactly. And that new resolution could be vetoed by the P3 or the U.S. So if their attempt to continue the relief failed, which it did, the sanctions automatically came back.
So the structure itself flipped the veto power, basically.
Precisely. Russia and China tried, didn't they? They put forward counter-resolutions.
Right, I remember reading about that. What were they?
Well, there was a sort of broad one, I think, from South Korea, just generally calling for sanctions relief, but that didn't go anywhere. More pointedly, Russia and China proposed extending the deadline for the snapback by 6 months, trying to buy time.
But both failed.
Both failed, because the core mechanism in 2231 was designed specifically to prevent a veto from stopping the snapback itself. It was quite a piece of diplomatic engineering.
And just for context, the original deal, the JCPOA, was supposed to have its main restrictions expire later this year, right? October 18th, 2025.
That was the official sunset date, yes. But because of these violations, the P3 triggered the snapback early. After a 1-month grace period where Iran didn't come back into compliance, the sanctions became effective on September 30th.
Okay, so the trigger is pulled, the veto attempts fail. Now for the really crucial part, what exactly snaps back? What sanctions are we talking about?
We're talking heavy-duty stuff. It wasn't just one or two things. The snapback brought back the full force of 6 previous UN Security Council resolutions against Iran. These were the ones passed between 2006 and 2010.
6 resolutions. What's the combined effect?
It's a comprehensive lockdown on their sensitive activities. You've got a full arms embargo, buying or selling weapons, a complete ban on uranium enrichment and reprocessing.
So no nuclear fuel cycle work at all?
None that's permitted under these resolutions. And a ban on developing or testing ballistic missiles that could carry nuclear warheads.
Yeah.
Plus, no one can give them technology or help in these areas either.
Wow. So it's not just freezing what they have, it stops them building anything new or getting outside help.
That's the core idea. And then there are the targeted measures hitting specific people and organizations.
Like asset freezes and travel bans.
Exactly. The UN list automatically reinstated those for 43 officials and 76 entities. And crucially, that list includes the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
A central part of their power structure.
Absolutely. And the Ministry of Defense, too. So it hits the military and nuclear programs directly. And our sources note that this list is actually just the starting point. The US, UK, and EU are already adding more names.
You mentioned transportation lines earlier. What about inspections?
That's another major piece. The Snapback restores the authority for UN member states to inspect Iranian cargo. We're talking planes like Mahan Air, Iran Air, and ships.
Any Iranian vessel or aircraft anywhere in the world?
If there are reasonable grounds to suspect prohibited items, yes. And if they find banned goods, missile parts, nuclear materials, weapons, they have the right, even the obligation under the UN Charter, to seize them. Every UN member is supposed to enforce this.
That must create huge problems for them moving anything sensitive.
Huge logistical and financial headaches, absolutely. And speaking of financial, the economic consequences are designed to be severe.
Beyond just the UN sanctions, what other economic pressures came into play from the EU, the US?
The EU, especially, layered on new sanctions targeting critical sectors. Their big focus is on Iran's main income sources, oil, gas, and petrochemicals.
Standard targets, you might say.
True, but here's a really interesting detail. The EU specifically targeted transactions involving gold and other precious metals, like diamonds.
Gold? Why gold? Usually sanctions hit bank transfers, dollars, swift access.
That's exactly why it's so strategic. When the regime gets locked out of the normal financial system, how do they move money? How do they pay for things?
They find workarounds, I assume.
They do. And a major workaround is using high-value, easily transportable commodities that operate outside the banking system, like gold or diamonds. They use these for barter, for settling debts, for acquiring foreign currency under the radar.
So by targeting gold and precious metals, the EU is trying to close one of their main escape routes from the financial sanctions?
Precisely. It hits their ability to bypass the formal system. It's a very targeted blow at their alternative financial network.
And the impact inside Iran on ordinary people. Regimes like this rarely absorb the economic pain themselves, do they?
No, typically they pass it straight on. And the projections are grim. You're looking at shortages of goods, rampant inflation making everything more expensive.
Which destroys savings and purchasing power.
Exactly. And a likely recession, especially hitting smaller businesses, the production sector, which means factory closures, rising unemployment.
And what does that do to public trust?
It shatters it. People see their money losing value. They panic. They try to convert their reals into anything more stable foreign currency, more gold if they can get it, even crypto. That's capital flight, and it just makes the currency spiral worse.
Does the regime try to control the narrative around this?
Oh, absolutely. It's textbook. Even though things like food and medicine are technically not sanctioned, the regime is already loudly blaming the banking sanctions for expected shortages and price hikes in those areas.
So they're preemptively blaming the West for the suffering they know their own policies, combined with the sanctions, will cause.
That seems to be the strategy, yes. Deflect blame for the inevitable economic pain.
And globally, are countries actually enforcing this? What about Russia or China?
Well, under the UN Charter, all member states are legally obligated to implement Security Council resolutions. If countries like Russia or China don't comply, they risk penalties, or at least international criticism and isolation on this issue.
Is it having an effect?
It seems so. The source material mentioned China, for instance, has already publicly announced it's limiting oil purchases from Iran. That signals an intent to comply, likely to avoid secondary sanctions or diplomatic fallout.
Okay, this external pressure is immense. Let's pivot to the internal reaction. What happened inside Iran the moment these sanctions officially clicked back into place?
The reaction was swift and heavily focused on internal security. According to our sources, Iran's Supreme National Security Council issued a detailed directive literally the next day, October 1st.
A security directive, what did it say?
It put the security forces on exceptionally high alert. We're talking 100% readiness for the regular army, 70% readiness for the IRGC and the Basij militia.
The Basij are the volunteer forces often used for crowd control, right?
That's them. And 50% readiness for the regular police forces. And get this, they canceled all planned military exercises. Instead, IRGC and Basij units immediately started live-fire drills focused on suppression tactics.
Practicing for protests, basically.
It certainly looks that way, preparing for potential civil unrest sparked by the economic shock.
The source material had a specific number for Tehran, didn't it? The deployment there.
It did, and it's staggering. The directive ordered a combined force of 33,000 security personnel onto the streets of Tehran for surveillance and patrol duty.
33,000?
Yes. Broken down, it was about 19,000 from the IRGC and Basij and 14,000 police. And that's not even counting plainclothes intelligence agents. That sheer number tells you how concerned the regime was about an immediate popular backlash.
What else was in the directive? Protecting infrastructure, information control.
All of that. Increased security around places seen as potential flashpoints, city squares, bazaars, bolstered protection for critical infrastructure, fuel depots, refineries, nuclear sites, presumably to prevent sabotage. There was also a push for increased cyber operations, likely monitoring dissent online.
And surveillance.
Enhanced surveillance, yes. The directive apparently gave security agencies deeper access into the data systems of all military and law enforcement branches, creating a more unified monitoring capability.
So a massive internal clampdown. But the directive also mentioned projecting strengths outwards, didn't it? Displaying political power.
It did. Alongside the defensive internal measures, there were offensive goals aimed at the international stage.
Like what?
Things like targeting vital economic interests of the U.S. and its allies. The sources mentioned potential smart disruption of energy routes. Also, strengthening ties with Russia and China to try and break the international isolation.
And a military goal in the region.
The directive mentioned creating a controlled balance of terror in the Persian Gulf, essentially using threats and limited actions to deter further pressure without necessarily starting a full war.
Okay, so pulling this all together, the sources argue the snapback really marks the end of any policy of appeasement or giving concessions, right? The term used was baj.
That's the argument, yes, that the regime tried diplomatic avenues to stop or soften the snapback and failed. Maximum pressure is now the undeniable reality they face.
The Cairo Protocol failure seems like a key example.
Absolutely. Iran signed that protocol with IAEA Director General Grossi, likely hoping it would buy them time, show some cooperation, maybe delay the snapback.
But the P3 weren't having it.
No, they rejected it almost immediately. One European official apparently even questioned if the deal was properly approved within the entire Iranian system, basically saying, "We don't trust this." The window for compromise slams shut.
Which brings us to the big question listeners probably have. Will Iran retaliate militarily? Will they lash out?
Based on the analysis in the source material, the top leadership is seen as unlikely to risk a direct major war.
Why not?
Because given the intense economic pressure and the potential for internal unrest, a major conflict could actually destabilize the regime itself. It could be an existential threat. So the calculation seems to be against large-scale direct confrontation.
So threats will likely continue through proxies. Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen.
That seems to be the preferred channel. Using proxies allows them to maintain pressure and project strength without the risks of direct war. But the effectiveness of these proxies is also being increasingly challenged, particularly in places like Iraq, where their influence is being curtailed.
So the regime is usually seen as a crisis generator, stirring up trouble abroad to distract or gain leverage. But now they're forced into crisis management at home.
That's a really good way to put it. The external pressure is so intense, it's forcing their focus inward. They have to manage the consequences of the sanctions, manage public anger.
How are they doing that, according to the sources?
Well, partly through the heavy security presence we discussed, but also through things like staged displays of national unity, propaganda efforts, and maybe offering very limited social concessions, perhaps to certain groups, to try and release some pressure without giving up real control.
So wrapping this up, the snapback isn't just lines on paper at the UN. It's a massive economic shock, triggering an unprecedented internal security response in Iran. It's flipped the regime's focus from external disruption to internal containment.
And I think what's really striking, what you should really think about, is that tension highlighted by the security directive. Deploying 33,000 troops in the capital, that's not a sign of confidence. That's a sign of deep fear about the popular unrest these sanctions are almost certain to fuel. The question is, when does that internal pressure become overwhelming?
The source material makes a final crucial point. It argues that while snapback creates the conditions for change, the ultimate outcome isn't decided by diplomats in New York or Vienna. It rests on the organized, continuous, radical revolutionary force inside Iran itself, what they refer to as the resistance units, or Kanun-e-Shirashi.
The idea being that external pressure creates the opening, but it's the organized internal opposition that needs to seize that opportunity. That interplay between external pressure and internal resistance seems key. It really makes you wonder, what's the breaking point?
A critical question indeed. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the real impact of the Iran snapback mechanism.
Thank you.
We'll see you next time.